I'm Ian Chapman from the Faculty of Health Sciences Admission Committee. We also deal with nursing, dentistry, psychology, health sciences, but I'm purely talking about entry to medicine. It's actually quite a complicated process. You may well have questions. I'll try and answer some afterwards. If you have more, there are people over in the Benithan Hall and also in the marquee down the back. And I'd strongly recommend that you get this book because it actually sets the process out pretty clearly, including giving you websites to go to and contact details to find out more information. Until about 20 or 30 years ago, there was only one way to get into medicine in Australia. You went to year 12, you got your academic score, and you applied to a 6-year undergraduate medical course in one of the capital cities, or there were a few others. That has all changed. There are now more medical schools. There are postgraduate medical schools as well as undergraduate medical schools. In fact, more than half the medical positions in Australia now are postgraduate. It's something like 2/3. So Melbourne, Sydney, Queensland, Western Australia have all moved to postgraduate courses. But we are still a 6-year undergraduate course, and we're going to talk about that. But one of the take-home messages is if you don't get in first time through this sort of process, there are other ways of doing it later on. So please don't give up. In fact, more and more people are doing medicine by postgraduate entry, having done another university degree first. Okay, but our program at the University of Adelaide is a 6-year course. So everybody does 6 years. It doesn't matter whether you come in having done a year of university through the tertiary transfer program, which I'll explain a bit, or defer or do anything else, you still do the full 6 years. The course has changed in the last 12 years. There's been a number of updates in the curriculum, and it's now quite heavily case-based, learning in small groups. You're given a clinical problem and you go away and source more information about that, come back, present that to the group, work that out. Compared to when I went through medicine some years ago, there is a lot more clinical contact earlier on in the course. We did a lot of basic science in the first year and didn't see patients until we were in third year. Now there is contact with patients and clinical learning from year 1, and that increases in intensity as you go through. There is exposure to the basic sciences that underpin those clinical sciences right from the start. So there are 3 main tracks to the course. There's the science that underpins the clinical medicine, there's the clinical medicine, and then there's professional and personal development, things like behaving appropriately and ethically. There is an expectation that you will be able to learn on your own, and that self-directed learning is very important, and we try and assess that to some extent in the admission process through the oral assessments and by giving you problems and so forth, although of course it may be quite difficult to do that. It's very important that you're aware of the rural medicine situation. It's so important that I'm going to emphasise it a bit and give you a little bit of background. So 30% of Australians live in what are categorised as rural areas, and they are underrepresented with doctors. So people want to improve that. The Commonwealth Government itself is very keen to do that, and we and the Commonwealth Government have put in place various steps to do that. Now, one of them is that in 5th year, a quarter of the students go out and spend a whole year in a rural setting. And the University of Adelaide, that's the Eyre Peninsula. We're talking about Port Lincoln, Port Augusta, Whyalla, Port Pirie, Kadina. Those people volunteer to go out there, and we've never had any trouble getting 25% of the year to volunteer to go out there, partly because it's a very enjoyable process. They actually probably, if anything, get more clinical exposure than they do in the city, and benefit directly from that, and seem to do as well, if not better, at the exams. So the idea is that by being exposed to rural medicine, you may be more likely to go back afterwards. As you'll see, there are also some rural bonded scholarships which you can voluntarily apply for and accept if you want to. So in exchange for actually getting a scholarship while you're going through medicine, you promise to go back and work in the country after you graduate. The third part of it is that we preferentially take students from rural backgrounds into medicine in first year. So this so-called rural pathway, which I'll explain a little bit more. That does not in any way oblige you to go and work anywhere afterwards. So you can come from the country and become a Sydney cardiologist if you want to. But the theory is that you are more likely to go back to the country, and that's why that preference is given. So if you are eligible to apply for medicine through the rural pathway, please do so. You cannot be disadvantaged. You can only be advantaged. Now, what do you have to do to be rural? You have to have lived for 5 years during primary school or high school in a rural location. There's a website which is in this book which tells you what those rural locations are. So if you're eligible, apply through that pathway. You cannot do worse. We need to increase the numbers that we bring in from rural background. Going back to this, so clinical teaching, as I said, begins in year 1 and increases as you go through. The sciences and the clinical aspects of it and the professional development are all integrated into the cases and increase as we go through. Now, I said it's complicated, it is a bit. There's a lot of initials and things. CSP stands for Commonwealth Supported Position. So there are full fee paying international students of whom we take about 30 per year. They are nothing to do with this. They are separate from you. If you're an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, then you're eligible to apply for a Commonwealth supported position. In fact, the international students, if anything, cross-subsidise our students. So they don't in any way reduce your chance of getting in. Now, the Commonwealth supported positions come in 3 different sorts. So there's an unbonded position, which is about 75% of our positions. And when you get through, you can go and work anywhere you like, subject obviously to your further training. That's what traditionally medical places were. In addition, the Commonwealth Government, in an effort to get doctors to where they haven't been willing to go, has now introduced bonded Commonwealth supported positions. And basically, you still pay the HECS fee, so both bonded and unbonded students pay the HECS fee, but in return for being allowed into medicine, you agree to go and work for 6 years after you graduate in an area of need, as decided by the Commonwealth Government. So that could be in New South Wales or Western Australia or Victoria if you wish to, or you can choose an area of need in your own state if you're from South Australia. Now, why would you accept such a position? Because it's done purely on your ranking in the admission process, and we offer the top 75% are unbonded and then the next 25% are bonded. So you can make a choice whether you want to come into medicine and accept a bonded position or not have a medical position in our course. They're still really quite favourable. There are large areas of the country are classified as areas of need, and you can start that 6 years up to 10 years after you graduate. So you can go off and do further training. But if you are considering that, I strongly urge you to go into the admission website, find out more about it, look into what the terms of those are. In addition, there are specific medical rural bonded scholarships. So here you pay your HECS, but they pay you, the Commonwealth Government pays you about $20,000 a year as you go through medicine. So you pay your HECS out of that, and you've got about $11,000 a year left over, and in return for that you are contracted to work for 6 years in the country after you graduate. So going back to HECS, HECS is about $9,400 a year for medicine. Multiply that by 6, that's your cost of doing it. Okay. If you are a bonded medical student, you can buy your way out of your bonding after you graduate. You can't do it before that, but you have to pay the difference between the full fee and the HECS. You have to pay basically $31,000 a year times 6. And you don't have to fulfil your bonding then, if that's what you want to do. So it is a bit complicated. Most people come in as school leavers, and you have to have a TR or ATAR, they're really interchangeable terms, your school grade in year 12. The minimum is 90, and that includes any bonus points that you get. Now for medicine, the only bonus points that apply are those through the University of Adelaide Fairway scheme. So there's no subject bonus points for getting into medicine. We've done away with those. Fairway bonus points, 6 points are added onto your TR score if you went to a rural school or a disadvantaged city school. And that obviously would help you enhance your chances of getting in. That applies to every single course at the University of Adelaide. We have no say about that, but that would help you get in. Obviously you might come up from the high 80s into the 90s and enhance your chance of getting in, or increase your score within the 90s, which would enhance your chance of getting in. We do have a small number of tertiary transfer positions. So if you're in year 12, this won't apply to you next year, but it could the year after. So you can do the first year of a University of Adelaide course, only the University of Adelaide, no other university, it only applies to the University of Adelaide, and then apply to come into medicine the following year. Instead of using your year 12 score, you use your university academic score from the first year. And it has to be at least a credit grade point average, which is 5. The maximum is 7 for a high distinction. The higher you get, the better your chance of getting in. Now you can do any University of Adelaide course you like. You can do music, you can do law, you can do engineering. The fact is most people do health sciences because it's more suited to what you would do in medicine, but you can do any course you like, as long as you meet the subject prerequisites. So either in year 12 or in that first year university course, you have to do either biology or chemistry or maths. So if you've already done them in year 12, you can go off and do first year music if you like, and then apply to do medicine, and you're eligible to get in if you do well enough. It was about 20 a year, it's been reduced to 15, it may be reduced a little bit more, but it's still quite a viable way of considering getting into medicine if you miss out the first time round. I've already mentioned the rural background entry. So if you are, and you can come in through either the school leaver or the tertiary transfer if you're rural background. And so if you are eligible, please apply. Just remember, it doesn't determine where you work afterwards. It's nothing to do with that. You can still work wherever you like, and you only have to have lived in the country for 5 years as a primary school student or a high school student. So in other words, if you're in a boarding school in Adelaide and you did all your primary school in the country, you're eligible. Okay, probably this should have been the first slide. Obviously consider that this is the right course and the right area for you. Talk to as many people as you can, find out about it. I would certainly strongly personally recommend it, and I think most of my colleagues would say that they've very much thought they made the right decision in becoming a doctor. I think if you look around, there are very few people with medical degrees who aren't still working as doctors, and that is testimony to the fact that for most of them it's a very rewarding career. Now, the UMAT, if you're in year 12, you've already done the UMAT. So this is the undergraduate medical and health sciences aptitude test. The results come out next month. Then you've got to apply for medicine or whatever your courses are. I think you get 6 preferences in South Australia through SATAC, and the deadline for that, as we'll show you, is the end of September. So you'll get your UMAT score before you have to make your application. Now the UMAT score is a bit of a black box. It's out of 300. We look at the total score, not the percentile. I don't even understand what the percentile is. Everyone seems to get 98. So it's the raw score out of 300 that matters. And people get scores anywhere between about 100 and 240. If you get 240, you're top of Australasia. So it's a hard test. So whatever you do, don't not put in an application because you look at your score and think it's no good. There's no such thing as a pass or fail. We decide how many people we want to offer oral assessments to. We just draw a line under that person. And so the score itself is just where you are in the ranking. It's not a pass or a fail. It applies for 1 year. If you want to defer or come around another year, you've got to do it again. You then put in your application through SATAC. Based on the UMAT score in October, we'll then send out offers for oral assessments, which our name for interviews, which take place in the first part of December in the most part, and a few of them are later in January, and I'll explain why. The offers go out, the first round offers usually go out about the middle of January or a bit afterwards, and then there are second and third and subsequent round offers until we fill our positions. What happens is we often offer positions to people who may not accept them or may initially accept them and then pull out and not accept them. For example, someone from Sydney might accept a position and then later on get offered a position in Sydney and choose that instead, so a position becomes available lower down the list and will move somebody up. And that also applies to bonded versus unbonded. You may be initially offered a bonded position and maybe later moved up to be offered an unbonded position. So these are the actual numbers. So September the 28th is the deadline. That's the same as applying for all other university courses. It used to be different, but it's now the same. There's one SATAC code. If you think you are eligible to apply through the rural pathway, then within 10 days of making your SATAC application, you have to send in a statutory declaration saying you've spent 5 years in the country. Now, there are details in here about where you can download those statutory declarations from. I can't emphasise enough that word strict. It should be in yellow and it should be in bigger font and it should be underlined. There is absolutely no way that you can get in if you apply late. So don't go online at 10 to midnight on the 28th of September. It's happened. Then find that your computer's not working or the internet's crashed or something like that. Unfortunately, we can make no allowance for that. So please do it in plenty of time. Make sure you put in your application. Every year, unfortunately, we get these tragic stories of people who forget or miss out or something. You will get acknowledgement online and you should keep that receipt to make sure that you can prove that you have put in your application and it has been received. You then get referred to the Faculty of Health Sciences tracking website, and then further communication, things like offers of oral assessments, offers and so forth, comes through that. Again, details all in the book. This is not strictly correct. We offer 700 oral assessments. Not everyone turns up. So we offer about 500 in December and about another 200 in January. As I said, we make the offers in October for December and then in January for later in January. There's no allowance for doing it outside that time. So if you're planning overseas trips or other things, you have to fit in around this if you want to do the oral assessment. You can't be offered an oral assessment in December and say, can I please defer it to January? If you're offered it in December, you have to do it in January. This year the oral assessments are slightly different. Previously we've had a single oral assessment with 2 assessors lasting 35 minutes. This year we're going to have 2 oral assessments of 15 minutes each with 2 assessors. So you'll be assessed by 4 assessors rather than 2. We're doing this for a variety of reasons, including uniformity of marking, which we think will be somewhat better, and allow a little bit more emphasis on problem solving this year than in previous years. But essentially it's largely unchanged. The sort of things that we assess are your ability to communicate. That's probably the most important thing, and obviously the one that can be assessed in an oral assessment fairly well. Your ability to show some evidence that you've worked in teams, thrived in a student-centred environment, are likely to be a self-directed learner. Your ability to make decisions and solve problems. As I said, as of this year, there's a sort of a problem-solving component. Won't give you any more details than that. Attention to detail and professional behaviour. This is code for turn up on time. Okay? Obviously you would like your doctor to turn up on time when you're very sick, and we don't have too many other ways of assessing your punctuality and conscientiousness other than how you proceed through this application process and whether you do turn up on time to the various components of the assessment. And obviously the obvious question about why you want to be a doctor, and some demonstration that you've thought about that and you've got an understanding of what's involved and the problems as well as the rewards of that. So at the end of that, the ATAR score comes out after that. Your Year 12 scores will come out after we've interviewed you, and the IB only comes out in January. We then form a composite mark based on 20% your UMAT score, 40% your Year 12, or in the case of tertiary transfer students, the GPA, and 40% your score in the oral assessment. And you get put into a general ranking list, and we just go down the list and make offers. We hold back enough positions so that we can make further offers to the people we interview later in January without disadvantaging them. So the offers that are made in January are made after the ATAR score comes out. So they are not made just on the basis of your UMAT score, but the combination of 20% UMAT, 40% ATAR. So if you don't do quite well enough at the UMAT, but then really do very, very well in your Year 12 exam, you may be offered an interview later in January. The reason for offering them then is because a lot of people will have already been made offers interstate, in particular the interstate applicants, and will accept them and will not need to come to our interviews. So it saves them and us the trouble of interviewing people who don't need an interview at that time. But the point is, if you miss out on an offer of the oral assessment in October, you may still have another chance. Again, go to the faculty website, because that will tell you whether you're being offered a bonded or an unbonded position. You don't have to apply for one or the other, you are automatically applying for both. We'll offer them to you on the basis of your ranking. You can't, you can reject a bonded position, but it makes sense to accept it subject to being upgraded to an unbonded, because that could still happen. And again, those things are all in the tracking website, those sorts of details. We then just keep making offers until we fill the positions, which may be even a week or 2 after the term starts. Orientation week is late February, and then the course starts the week later. The details about what you have to do beforehand are all in this book, but you need to register with the medical board as a student. You need to have certain testing to make sure you don't have infectious diseases, a police check, a first aid certificate. I mentioned earlier that 25% of students go out to rural locations. That has been on a voluntary basis. We've never had any trouble filling those positions. They are very highly thought of. However, you will be asked to sign a form saying that in the event that 25% of people don't volunteer, you agree that you would be subject to a ballot to go out to a rural location in 5th year. So again, as I said, that hasn't happened to date. Then you enrol online. I think that's it. Finished early this time. Any questions? Do you all yes?
Yeah. How many places do you have?
It's not been decided yet. It's probably going to be about 100 to 120 or so commencing first year local students, plus 30 internationals, plus however many first years repeat. So it could be somewhere around 160, 170 in first year next year, which is somewhat down from the last few years. And one of the reasons for that is we're starting to make way for a postgraduate component to the course, which is likely to start in 2 years. Won't be the whole course, it'll just be a component of it. Because that'll be a 4-year course, we're having to create a bit of spots now. Up the back.
Yeah, local means South Australian or
No. Local means Australian.
so no specific placement for South Australian students? Certain numbers for local?
No, none whatsoever. It's a good question because people do get quite interested in that. Universities are run by the Commonwealth government. This money is provided by the Commonwealth government. They provide 80% of the cost of the medical education, so they have quite a lot of say over who gets in and what happens. The High Court of Australia, in a legal challenge about just this sort of issue, has decided that there must be freedom of trade across state. So as a Commonwealth-funded institution, we cannot be biased against interstate applicants and have to give them equal opportunities to South Australians.
But certain universities are mentioning that it's for local students. They are going to give preference to the local ones. Tasmania,
Who are?
like Tasmania, University of Tasmania is
Yeah, no, you're right. The difficulty is that we get quite a few people from interstate who come for oral assessments, we offer them positions and then they turn them down. So there are logistic issues, because they'd rather be in their own state, and that's fair enough. There are logistic issues about doing all those oral assessments, so we'd like to make that more efficient. There is a slight preference given to South Australian applicants when we offer the December oral assessments. We slightly increase their UMAT marks, but then take that off afterwards. That is the only preference that's given. There's no preference once the final positions are offered. We're not allowed to. Now, if Tasmania and other people are doing that, that's fine, but it could be subject to legal challenge if they're not doing it in the appropriate manner. We end up with probably 60 or 70% of the people in our course from South Australia. Now, 7% of the population of Australia lives in South Australia. So there's a heavy overemphasis on South Australians coming into this course, but we still get a fair number of interstate applicants. And we get people from here going interstate. I didn't make that clear. If you're really serious, apply for all the other medical courses as well. Every year we get people who get into Monash from Adelaide and vice versa. By all means apply elsewhere. Make sure you look at their prerequisite subjects. They're different in every medical school. A couple of years ago, if you did English and chemistry, you covered every medical school in Australia, but that does vary. But the difference, there are different entry requirements because there are different courses and they're looking for people with different sort of qualities. So it may be that you do better at, say, the Monash entry process than you at Adelaide and vice versa. And so we have people from Adelaide moving interstate and people from interstate coming here. Yes?
You mentioned the UMAT score just lasts for 1 year, so
Yeah.
does that mean if you're taking a gap year, you need to do it again?
Yes. What they do is they repeat some of the questions to try and get uniformity from 1 year to the next. And if you can carry it over, then they can't repeat too many questions. So to try and get that uniformity, they've made people do it every year.
Because that's a new thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's not been...
It's a recent thing, yeah. I think it's just this year for the first time. Yeah. Unfortunately you have to do it again. And if you apply in year 12 and don't get in and want to come back and do it as a tertiary transfer student the next year, you've got to do it again the following year. Yes?
About the interstate entry, you're saying like they apply everywhere. So if you get like people getting entry into Monash or something,
Yeah.
if they start the degree there, is it possible to move like your points over and move here to South Australia?
No, it's not. Because everyone wants to do that, of course. I mean, you've got your Adelaide person sitting in Perth and your Perth person sitting in Adelaide. Why not do a swap? But in fact, that isn't allowed. There's been specific agreements between the university that isn't permitted, except under extreme circumstances. The deans can get together and allow a transfer. Now, the sort of things we're talking about are terminal illness, really serious. So basically, it doesn't happen. If you get in one place, you stay there. You can't swap back to another.